My name is Precious Onyewuchi. I work as an open source manager. I contribute to open source and then I educate about open source, like I'm going to be talking today. I like conversations. I like traveling if I have money. And then I like to learn. My topic is on demystifying OSPOs, understanding what they are, their value, and how to build one in your organization. Did we like my wand? How many of us watched Cinderella? Only two hands, my God. Cinderella. You don't know about the lady that had to run away by midnight. So she will not change. Anyway, don't mind me. But yes, what is an OSPO? So typically you can say OSPO, but most people pronounce it as OSPO. I'll be talking about why they are important. I will be giving some examples of existing OSPOs and how we can build OSPOs for the African context. I'm going to start with a fun fact. So a Harvard Business School study estimates that the supply side value of widely used OSS, which is open source software, is around $4.15 billion, while the demand side value is much larger at 8.8 trillion. What that means is the economic impact created by using open source is about 2,120 times greater than the cost of producing it. Before I go too deep, how many of us know what open source is? Is this your first time hearing about open source? No? Yes? Open source software is source code that is easily modifiable, distributed, and can be used, right? So it's different from maybe the other part is proprietary software, which is software that you cannot change. The way they give it to you is the way that you have to use it, unless maybe they decide to value user feedback. But for open source software, you can say, I don't like that this bottle is transparent. I want it to be pink. And then you send it to the maintainer, and then they can decide, okay, this person's their value, their contribution makes sense. Maybe we should change it pink, and then they can decide to change it pink the whole way, or they may decide not to change it, but you can change your own version to just be pink for you. Does that make sense? Cool. Okay. So why is this conversation important? I don't know, you know this, we've seen this meme more recently these days when the AWS thingy went down and then the Cloudflare, yeah. But originally, this is what I've known it to have, like a project some random person in Nebraska has been tanklessly maintaining since 2003. Basically, it just shows that most of the tools that we have open source embedded in them, right? It's just somebody deciding, I don't like how this is, or I want to contribute to this. And before you know it, almost every JavaScript dependency you have is open source and it's just built by somebody that did it out of their free will. But then you'll be angry that why are they not updating it? But then you also find out that this person has a full-time job and they may not necessarily be able to do that all the time. So yeah, open source is the foundation of digital infrastructure. Almost every organization and individual depends on it. And then OSPOs create structure within these organizations to properly maximize this fact. I'm going to explain what an OSPO is now. Right, so you hear OSPO. So an open source program office is the organization's central function for managing open source activity, right? So it defines governance, policy, supports contributions, aligns business and engineering goals, and then it fosters a culture of openness. So basically, they are the people that in an organization, we probably use a lot of open source stuff, and it's like, oh, how do you want to make sure that things like licenses, which is in open source the guardrail that lets you know this is how much or how far you can go when you want to use this product. So basically, the OSPO department will tell you, hey, if we're going to implement this in our software, we can commercialize it, or we cannot commercialize it, or this is what we can or cannot do. Yeah, this is like a larger image. So sometimes it can lead to community, there can be management, it can be compliance, contribution, participation, training, there's strategy advice, there's measuring the impact of OSPOs. It's really, really like large, the work that you can do, depending on the size of the organization and then also the maturity. Why are OSPOs important? I've given one example where I'm talking about like licenses, right? So without an OSPO, organizations can face things like unclear licensing, where you're not sure the limits or the boundaries of the tool that you want to use. Then you have fragmented policies and then hidden risks. For organizations that have OSPO, there is coordination, there's a clear strategy to what you're using, there is trust, both within the organization itself and then the open source maintainers, and there's an opportunity for stronger partnerships with open source projects. Right, so there are 5 main pillars of OSPOs. There's strategy, which defines why and how your organization engages with open source. There is compliance, which manages licenses, IP, which is intellectual property, and security responsibly. There is culture that promotes openness and collaboration as part of daily work, where it doesn't just stop at, oh, because I'm contributing to open source projects, then we should probably have clearer documentation. If we can talk about the process of why on how we build something that is currently popularly used, we cannot talk about it publicly. So there are some organizations that are not particularly open source, but you see that they have like a steady blog post where they talk about their projects or their products that they are building and the thought that went into it. Then you have governance, which like sets clear rules and compliance standards. Like this is how far we can go. This is how far we should not go, that sort of thing. And then you have community, where we build relationships inside and outside the organization, depending on the context. Right. So some case studies. I want to tell you that you see that Porsche and Mercedes Benz that is there? It was very intentional. Because if I say OSPOs, it might be a little limiting for you to think about where they can be applied. But like most of us may know the Google open source, we may know Spotify, you might know Microsoft, but then like learning about like our favorite car brands having OSPOs in them too, it's a really good way for you to see how different organizations across different disciplines are able to implement these departments into their work. So generally, what they do is you find that they have certain tools that are created to be open source, right? That we can use and then you can also modify. And then you also see, for example, Google has like an open source peer bonus thing where they reward open source contributors for contributing to open source. It's like the GitHub star, but I don't think it's as known as the GitHub star. Right, so we're Africans. And most of the time, if you hear OSPOs, I think personally, every single time that we've mentioned an OSPO, it's a little hard for me to trace 1 or 2 organizations that are implementing them. And then for where I work, which is the Data Science Without Borders project, you see that we are implementing open practices in sharing and strengthening data science practices across Africa. So it may not necessarily have one particular way to follow, which is why you adjust to fit your particular situation. Right, another fun fact. So a study by Open Forum Europe in 2018 estimated that OSS contributes between 65 to 95 billion euros to the European Union's GDP and promising significant growth opportunities for the region's digital economy. This may not seem like a lot. It was around 0.4 to 0.5%. May not be like plenty, but if you check that, that's around the same value that industries like the film and creative industries and forestry and pharmaceutical manufacturing gave to the EU's GDP around that year, you see how huge this value is, right? And I think that's something that we can adopt for here. So do we need OSPOs? No long talk. Short and long answer is yes, we do. All right. So if you decide that you want to apply open like OSPOs, right? Like I said, depending on your organization size, you may decide that it's not the right fit. But in the case that it is, something you want to do is first of all make an assessment. Do we need this? Do we not need this? How much open source tools do we have? How much do we use? Is it something that if we do not actively involved in preserving them, it can affect the value that we give to our users. So that's something that you can now check and to help you know, okay, I want to go ahead with this, so I don't want to go ahead with this. And then you now also want to define your goals, right? What is the aim of us contributing to this project? Is it, I don't know, maybe you want your company to be a little bit more familiar with open practices, or you just want to be able to contribute financially to them. So it depends. And then you now also want to secure executive support. So if you're an OSPO, it's a little hard for me to come and tell, like maybe the CTO or the CFO that I want us to contribute to an open source project because I think it gives value to our organization. But you also need them to be on board with you before you can implement that, right? So you want to get their support. If that happens, then you also want to form a core team. You want to establish clear policies, and then you can scale gradually from there. different OSPO models. So I've been saying here since that depending on the size of your organization and what you need, there's one where it's centralized. You just have like one department, like the marketing department, right? And then that office manages all your open source work. But then you can also have distributed where different teams can share the OSPO duties. And then you have hybrid where you have like a small OSPO team that's embedded with champions in each team, right? So the model depends on your organization size, your culture, and then your maturity. Um, some of the challenges that people face sometimes is getting executive buy-in, which is a fancy word for execs telling you that they don't see the point of implementing this department. It can also be a way to another challenge is tying adoption to profit maximization. So generally, businesses, what you're trying to do is maximize profit and minimize costs, right? So if you come and say, oh, we need to get a new department, one of the challenges that you might face is explaining how does this help us make more money or reduce the cost that we currently have going on. And then another thing might be internal adoption. So you've had these people that do things that the way they want to do it, right? You just write your code. Nobody else has to know how it was written or the process behind it. You don't need to share it with anybody. If you carry it and go, if you leave the job today, the next person that comes, whatever it is that they see, they can take it like that. So sometimes those type of adoption into changing the processes that we practice can be a challenge. But those can be solved by, so for the lack of executive buy-in, something you want to do is to be able to get previous case studies, right? Use examples of organizations that have implemented this and how it helped, and then look for how to fit it into the context of your own organization. Part of it can be, okay, maybe we use 100 software dependencies, and you can find that maybe 50 or 60% of them are open source, right? Look for a way to tie value and say, if we are able to get our developers contribute with their own man hours, it would be easier for us to get these maintainers to be able to implement the changes that we've been asking them to do. It makes it easier for you to get the fixes that you're asking for. It's probably also easier for you to be able to have like one-on-one trust with the maintainer, where if you have a problem, you know how, like you mentioned, getting support, right? Because the maintainer is familiar with you, they've seen how much work you've got in your company to put in, maybe if it's just through financial donations or getting contributors to the project. It's an easy way for you to be able to say, look, if we had gone the other way around, or if we have to change to a commercial software, they will charge us X amount. But if we contribute to this using like your 9 to 5, you just block out maybe 1 or 2 hours from every dev's time. It saves us time, and then it also saves us money, right? So that's like something you can do. And also generally answers the second point about tying adoption to profit maximization. It may not necessarily maximize profit in the first time, but at least it helps you save cost. And then internal adoption, one of the things would be explaining to devs how it's important to share their work. So everybody may not need to go open source, right? And another part is inner source, which is like practicing open source practices inside the organization, right? So it can be writing blog posts about the processes of how you built what you were doing. If you have resources that can be shared to the public, you can do that, or at least making the internal processes clearer to the different departments that are available. So if you do adopt an OSPO, some of the things that you want to use to measure that, okay, we're making impact, and these departments that we've recently implemented has been able to do such and such. Number of approved contributions. You have policy adoption across departments. You have external community partnerships, depending on the project. And then you have developer engagement and satisfaction. Your devs, are they telling you that, oh, it's easier for us to ship now because we've been able to effect the changes that we needed to the whole time? Yeah. So also are generally evolving. We're expanding beyond software. There's AI everywhere now. There's open data. There's open research. Open data is generally where you have data that is publicly available. It's anonymized, and you've not made anything sensitive outside, but it's enough for people who are doing research to be able to get the information that they need, especially depending on the type of work that they're doing. And then it also helps drive sustainability and digital transformation efforts. I think for here, where we have a little bit more hiding culture and less knowledge sharing, also helps us to be able to do that both individually and as an organization, because then by default you're sharing and you're making your work open. So other people can also learn from what you're doing, and it's faster for like innovation to happen because you've seen somebody else fail and then you can adapt from what they've done and build on it. So it helps successes come out better. Yeah, open is important, especially for our continent if we want to improve significantly and innovate quickly. There's always the whole thing about we need to move from consumer to creator. One of the first ways to do that is by practicing more open. I want to say practicing more open practices. But yes, that's it. By implementing more open source practices. And then open source practices championed by OSPOs enable us a step in and then to close the gap that we face globally from this part of the world. Thank you so much for listening to my talk. I generally ask for feedback, so please give me feedback on what you thought so that I can improve for future talks. Thank you. Did I take questions or we're done?
And thank you very much for the presentation. It was very engaging, and this is my first time actually listening to actually hearing about OSPO, and that kind of gives me an idea because I'm team lead where I come from, and we're a very small team and a mix of interns and experience. So, how do we get that into our system? Kindly note that it's a small team, so let me say about 8 individuals playing different roles and different experience levels. So how do we adopt that in that kind of setup where we are still, trying to keep track of our, 9 to 5 tasks and all of that, but actually something that we would like to adopt. So how do we manage that then? Which kind of support should we be looking forward to having in an environment like Nigeria, where usually people tend to think about more of a startup and get this investment, big money, and all of that. But like, what's the kind of support kind of community should we look forward to having? Thank you very much.
What sector do you work in?
We are generally, so to say, so we maintain organization software, then we build for partners. So we are generalists. We are not really maybe like Web3 or something like that. So we are generalists.
So typically, if you have like proprietary software, you can decide you don't want to fully go open source now. Yeah, cool. Part of the things that you can do if you want to implement open practices is, let's say for instance, you're building a tool, right? You do not have to talk about the tool itself, but you can share like the process that went into it, right? So generally you want to keep company secrets, that sort of thing, but you can talk about how it was built, why it was built. So something as simple as writing a blog post about it, right? Or giving a presentation around it. That way people know about it, right? It can even help you get into the eye of potential customers. And at the same time, somebody else who is planning on building something similar can be able to see what the challenges you're facing are. So there's a part where you're like, oh, this is my competition, right? But on the other hand, it's that now you have a space to be able to build and fail faster and then build quickly. Do you get? So if you are building something really cool, you can talk about it. And interestingly, you can also have somebody say, hey, I tried building this thing like that. Imagine they were like 3 of you had the same method of building. So you build, and then he also had built something similar to you before. He would be able to say, oh, I tried doing this thing. I saw your blog post. I think you can try this other method I did that worked better for me, right? So it can just be as easy as sharing the process I went into what you're about to build or talking about it publicly, that sort of thing, right? And then it can also be if you have resources that you reference, you can share them too, make your work easily findable, right? So maybe your websites. That's if you don't have a website. I'm hoping you do. But yeah, like make your websites findable. There's the whole fair policies things, which is like findable, accessible, interpretable. But that's like around data. But that's something you can like adopt for your tool. also try to make it accessible. So it may not be, again, it's proprietary software, so things have to be closed, but it should be easy to use, right? People should be easy to find it. If somebody is looking for who does, maybe it sounds like an agency type of thing that you do, it shouldn't be hard for people to look at you, that sort of thing, right? And then for support, I would say more that maybe you want to be giving support first, since it's like a smaller company. If you have an open source tool that you people rely on a lot, one of the ways that, obviously not financially because you may still be growing, but one of the ways that you can contribute is being a part of the community and saying, we make use of this tool. I see that there are issues on it that need to be triaged or that need to be fixed. I can contribute to it because this is how it impacts us, and this is how I would like to like make sure that it's easier, like for the maintainer. Nobody has a question from this side. Oh, that's cool. Any other question? I have like 2 minutes left.
Okay, thank you very much, Precious, for the presentation. And this is my first time hearing about OSPOs. I've been wondering what OSPOs were or what OSPOs are. And thank you for this session. Do we have organizations like OSPOs in Nigeria here in Africa?
To be honest, there is none that I personally know of. I know that sometimes we, like I said,
Sorry.
the project that I work on, it's for African, like it's an African based project, but we contract like an external hospital that is not in the continent. Right.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. All right.